Welcome back. Week three's lesson is titled, He Will Provide a Way Out. It comes from 1 Corinthians, where St. Paul writes, No trial has come to you but what is human. God is faithful and will not let you be tried beyond your strength. But with that trial, he will also provide a way out so that you may be able to bear it. Okay, so let's look at how does God allow us a way out? What I want you to do is I want you to imagine you've heard about this beautiful view at the top of the hill. Everyone has talked about how great this view is at the top of the hill. And you decide one day you're going to take the walk up the hill and you're going to go see it. But as you're going, you notice a large boulder breaks loose, large enough to hurt you. And you have to figure out very quickly, what am I going to do? So what do you do? Do you maybe run up to it and try and catch it before it gains too much speed and then you can save yourself from it? Or maybe you run down the hill and run away from it. Or do you freeze and just let it run over you? Okay, what do you do? You probably notice that these are the three common responses when a stressful situation comes up: fight, flight, or freeze. Okay. And you know what? This is also the three most common responses we have when the sexual temptation comes our way, particularly the temptation to look at pornography. What do we do? Let's imagine that boulder is a temptation to look at pornography. What do we do? Do we try and resist it and fight it and push it off? Okay. Well, like with a heavy boulder, you may run out of strength and it may roll onto you and crush you. Or do you just run away from the temptation? Okay. But when that happens, what eventually happens when you have to go in and you now have to face the temptation and you can no longer run away? And the third option, freeze, well, I just won't do anything. I'll just give up. Okay. Those are probably the three main things you've done in an attempt to overcome pornography up to this point. But I want to introduce to you a fourth method. Okay. And what this would be is, imagine the boulder's coming down at you. And rather than react right away, you pause, watch its path for a moment, see where it's going as it comes down the hill at you, and then simply move out of its way and let it pass. What if we could respond to pornography and overcome that temptation as easily as watching that boulder come down, figuring out its path, and letting it go away? And so tonight I want to talk about that more. So this temptation to look at pornography, we talked last week about how sometimes it's because we want to avoid pain. And this week we're looking at that third strength of the lower brain, which is seeking pleasure. Okay, we get a test or a stimulus that wants us to look at pornography because in the past we've identified it as pleasurable. Okay, what do we do in this situation? Well, what that stimulus is creating an urge in you. Okay, and here's some things that we want to look at. Three things in regards to urges. First, realize it's just a strong desire or impulse that you're having at that moment. It's not something that you have to do. But urges can be something that become a conditioned response. That every time in the past when we've had the urge, we just go with it and indulge in sexual sin. The third thing to know about urges is they're a lot like our emotions that we feel. We feel them in our body, okay? And so we're going to talk about this. Let's look at this idea of urges, particularly sexual urges, becoming a conditioned response. And the granddaddy of conditioned responses came from Pavlov's dogs. If you're not familiar with it, Ivan Pavlov was a Russian scientist in the late 1800s. And what he wanted to do was research conditioning of people and animals. And so what he did is he had a group of dogs, and right before he would feed them, he would ring a bell. And then he'd feed them. And he kept doing that day after day after day. He'd ring the bell, and then he'd feed them. He'd ring the bell, and then he'd feed them. And what he found was that eventually he could simply ring the bell, And the dogs would begin to salivate in anticipation of food, even if he wasn't going to give it to them. And so this proved to Pavlov that it is possible to condition our response into people. And that for many of us, maybe that's what pornography has been. It's we get a stimulus and we simply go with the response that we've learned. But Pavlov was curious, what happens if I have the stimulus, but I don't bring the food? What happens? And so he actually did that. And what he learned is it's actually possible to reverse the conditioning process. Okay. So he would ring the bell and the dogs would salivate, but he wouldn't reward them with the food. He'd do it again, not reward them with the food. And over time, they eventually began to salivate less and eventually got to the point where they would hear the bell and they wouldn't even respond at all. Okay. And so know that we can experience the same type of thing on this journey to freedom from the desire to look at pornography. If we can allow that urge to go without being reinforced, we can decrease over time our desire to look at that to the point where a temptation comes up and we just let it go. Now let's look a little bit at this idea that emotions and urges are felt in our body. So emotions are actually, we feel them in our body. And maybe you've heard people say, you know what, for me, when I get stressed, I feel it in my upper neck and shoulders, okay? That's where I feel stress or anger. Some people, maybe their stomach will become easy when they're nervous, okay? They feel it in their stomach, okay? Sometimes when people are gonna get bad news, maybe the death of someone that they love, they'll say, hey, sit down, okay? Because they found that, you know what, the legs get weak when we get bad news or we're devastated, okay? And what we found, scientists have found, is that that's caused because there's peptides in our body and they flow either to or away from specific parts or muscles in our body when we experience emotions. The same thing happens with our urges. And I want to talk a little bit about that. What we can learn to do is, in slowing down, we can learn to observe and notice the emotions and the urges that we begin to feel, okay? About a decade ago, scientists went through and they actually did a study on this. They began with a person feeling just neutral emotionally, and that's what we have here in this upper corner that's mostly black, because that's just somebody that has neutral emotions, not really intense one way or the other. And then they would get them to feel a strong emotion or emotion very strongly. And what they would measure is they would measure the yellow, the red, these oranges is peptides going to that part of the body. And so the muscles would kind of tense up. Or if in the case of like sadness here, the peptides leave the body and kind of weaken it, those muscles, that's what they would experience for some of these negative emotions. All right. And so let's take a look at this. For example, anger, I talk about stress and anger and how I'd feel that in my neck and upper back. That's exactly consistent with what these scientists saw. I gave the example of when someone gets devastating news, how their legs can get weak and they can fall down and collapse. And that's why we a lot of times will encourage people to sit before we give them bad news. We'll notice here that the peptides are leaving the body, or this part of the body, and so that their legs are becoming weaker. Okay. A few months back, because of a work situation, I had to briefly watch a video. And it was a video that was, I didn't know it when I was starting to watch it, but it was designed to be a sexually arousing video, okay? So I started watching it, and I'd been studying this information in preparation for this course. And when I saw it and I quickly realized what it was, I began to feel that my body was tensing up, okay? And it wasn't in the places that one might think you normally tense up when you see something sexually stimulating. Okay, it actually was consistent with this pattern of anxiety. Okay. I felt it through my upper chest and kind of this outside area of my upper body. And I realized that, you know what? That was my alarm bell going off of, hey, this is something I don't want to be looking at, because I don't want to go down the road of being tempted to, oh, now I'm stimulated. Now I want to go look at pornography and do whatever. And it was interesting because I had been studying this. I stopped and I observed, and I was like, wow, that is really interesting. And of course, once I recognized what was going on, I stopped the video and did that, stopped watching it. But I was very observant of what was going on in my body. Okay. And so what we can do with these urges and even the negative emotions is we can become aware of what's going on in our body. And we can actually then begin to, if we slow down our breathing, engage our higher brain, notice where that is tensing up, or maybe our body is weakening in certain places, we can actually begin to just recognize it, acknowledge it, and let it go. Much like that boulder coming down the hill, it's coming at us. I'm reacting. Oh, wait, let me stop long enough. And I'm just going to get out of its way and let it go. Okay. Doesn't mean the boulder didn't come at us. We acknowledged it. We know it's there, but we just let it go, keep on going down the hill. So let's talk about what we can do that when we see specifically a sexual stimulus and something that maybe in the past has led us down the path of looking at pornography. Okay, I want to use an image for you. Let's imagine you're standing next to the river, and upstream in the river, you see a leaf floating, and it's coming down the river, and you're seeing it. And maybe in the past, when you were younger, you would be tempted to want to go into it and grab it and play with it. But this time you see it, you notice it, and you watch it flow down the river. And eventually it floats away. Okay. We can learn to do the same thing with sexual stimulus and those temptations to look at pornography. All right. And the way we do that, first recognize, hey, I don't want this to become just a conditioned response. I want to choose how I respond to this temptation or to this stimulus. And then I want you to practice a pattern called stop, drop, and breathe. Okay. It's similar when you learned fire safety in school, you might have heard of stop, drop, and roll. Okay. Stop, drop, and breathe is a process of stop what you're doing, slow down your breathing, just focus on your breathing a little bit, and then drop into your body to experience where in your body you're either feeling more tense, or maybe you feel a weakening of your body. And just as you slow down your breathing, just observe. And what you'll find is usually within a minute, minute and a half, whatever that feeling is, as long as you take yourself away from the stimulus, that urge or that emotion will just kind of pass. Okay. So again, it's like that boulder's coming at us. We see it, we acknowledge it. We're not denying that it's there, but we're slowing down, we're changing our response to it and just allowing it to go on by us. So in letting that urge go, I want you to practice this process. I recommend doing it not with sexual temptations. I actually recommend doing it with a food that you really like. Okay. So I mentioned many times that one of my favorite desserts is a concrete mixer cookie dough. All right. And so I did this one time is I got my cookie dough concrete mixer. And when I got it, I just kind of looked at it. I kind of was like imagining myself eating it. And I'm like, oh, the excitement was building up. I was getting excited, and I would take the spoon and I'd kind of feel, get the spoon ready to eat, and kind of what was my body feeling at that time. Okay. What that did is it allowed me to build an awareness of how I'm responding to certain stimulus. Okay. Now, if you can, with that particular food, if you can take it, observe what it's doing in your body, and then choose to put it away and maybe eat it at a later time, that would be a great thing to do. Because part of what we want to do is we want to learn with, our saying no, not right now to sexuality is not a forever thing. Okay. It's something that at some point, if we're called to marriage, within the context of marriage, sex is a good thing. So it's not that we want to repress it and totally put it away. We just want to learn to be able to say, you know what, I recognize that this is what this is. I'm just going to set this aside for now. Okay. And then what I want you to do is, in the back of the workbook, in the appendix, there's a page there called an urge counter. And what that is when you experience a sexual stimulus or a temptation, and you go through this process of stop, drop, and breathe, I want you to mark on your work in your workbook there, each time that you're able to do that, stop, breathe, slow down your breathing. Okay, just observe. Okay, observe what's going in your body, and then just let it go. Each time you can do that with an urge, I want you to mark that down in the book. And the reason for that is a lot of times we'll put pressure on ourselves. Okay, I've been a day, 2 days, a week, 2 weeks, however long, without looking at pornography or engaging in a sexual sin. That really, for some of us, that may not be the best way to measure our progress. The fact that we can experience the temptation or the stimulus and choose to let it go for a period of time, that in itself is great progress. And over time, as we do that more and more and more, it's just like with Pavlov's dogs, that if when the bell rings, the food doesn't come, eventually the dog stops salivating. The same thing can happen for us. And be patient with yourself. Remember that this is a process. I talked in the first week about how we can compare this to wanting to increase the amount of weight we can bench press by 50 pounds. Okay. If you just did that, you found out what your max weight was today, and you just added 50 pounds to it and went off by yourself and went to bench press that, you would run the risk of hurting yourself very severely. But again, if you went through a very specific training process with the guidance of a coach or a mentor or a trainer that could walk you through that, over a period of time, you can get to the point where you can lift that amount of additional weight. That's what this journey is like in finding freedom from the temptation to look at pornography. This is a process. You can get there. Just remember each of these techniques because they're going to build on each other. Stop, drop, and breathe. Slow down your breathing. Observe what you're feeling in your body. And remember that after about 60 to 90 seconds, that temptation, that feeling will pass away on its own. And if we don't reinforce it, it will eventually weaken to the point where we have freedom when we experience these types of stimulus. So again, brothers, remember you were called for freedom. That's what God made us for and wants us to experience. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to get in touch. Email us at info@freedomtolove.org. More than happy to do anything we can to help. Otherwise, take some time, answer any questions you might have in the small group. Take the time, continue the daily readings, the videos, the workbook exercises, and we'll see you back here next week.